lovely Tuesday evening. You have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for the likes on TikTok. I really do appreciate it. Please, if you're on TikTok, don't stop our tapping. I need to get the likes up. Um, Now I'm missing certain guys who. But please, let's not make let's make up for the absence. So please, let's power tap. They're going to join us much later. But please, if you're on TikTok, kindly power tap. Just steady tap on your screen. This will help us get on the FYP right here on TikTok. And also click on the heart icon above my picture to join the team. Remember the team already. Please drop a heart to me, drop a gift. Thank you very much. We're streaming today, of course, here on TikTok and also on YouTube and Facebook. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, please like the live and also share. Thank you very, very much. All right, let me just check to be sure we're good on YouTube and we can get started. Folks, please be on TikTok. I really need us to contact. It's Tuesday, so we're not coming on camera, so we have to really back up so we can keep this live going. Okay, we have something very cool to discuss today. I'm listening to a recording on Aburi, and I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it. But we have to keep the live alive if we're going to, give ourselves a chance of listening. So please, let's get the lights up. You're probably busy on maybe you're working or something, but please just find a spare hand. Like, thank you very, very much. All right. So today we are going to be listening to a recording, The Roads to Aburi, and the stories we were never told. It's pretty long, so we're going to get started like as soon as I'm done here. So please enjoy the. Okay, I'm going to read the description. Then we're going to listen to it. I don't want to give an introduction because it's the introduction inside the video itself is long enough. It's long enough for you to get the angle we're coming from. All right, so let's get the description that we listen to the recording. For decades, many voices from the southeast have echoed the chant on Aburi we stand, as though Aburi holds a mystical solution to Nigeria's problems. That was carefully shaped by Ojukwu and his propaganda machinery and sold as a story of permanent victimhood and promised redemption. What really gets mentioned is that the Aburi decisions were not ignored or buried. They were implemented in Decree 8 of March 17, 1967. That single fact changes the entire conversation and forces a deep look at what Aburi really meant and what followed after. Before we even touch the decree itself, we need to clear one major distortion. Nigeria's history did not begin with the July 29 counter coup. A lot had already happened, power had shifted, decisions had been taken, tensions had been escalated. This video walks through that full journey from the first coup to the road that led to Aburi. Once you see the sequence clearly, the slogans lose their magic and the history becomes harder to bend. This is the road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. Please enjoy while you're listening. Kindly power tap across all platforms, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or right here on TikTok. Thank you very much. Again, this is the road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. Enjoy. Wow, I've been speaking for a bit. Wow, I've been speaking for a bit. I just noticed that the mic was off all the while. I apologize for that. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a beautiful, beautiful Tuesday evening. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you very much for your presence and thank you for the 775 likes up here on TikTok. Good evening once again. I see Olori, a great boy. Thanks everyone for being here. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Please, if you're on TikTok, don't stop our tapping. Like the live, share the live, If you're on YouTube or Facebook, please like the live and also share. That way, live stream can be recommended to other users. Again, also, if you're on TikTok, please click on the heart icon above my picture and join the team. If you're already a member of the team, please click on it and drop a gift, drop a heart me, so that way we can push the live to the FYP together. We're going to have a great time today. Today we'll be listening to The Road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. This recording actually is about the old thing of Aburi, but like we always do here, we don't go straight to the conversation, and the reason is because a lot of things happened before that event, and it's important to understand the circumstances surrounding an event rather than just discussing the event as though it happened in a vacuum. So we're going to be listening to certain things before we get into the Aburi conversation proper, which is why we've called it The Road to Aburi. Okay? So please, while we're trying to get this started, please like the live, share the live. Thank you very much. I'm going to read the description because it's pretty long and I want you to enjoy every bit of it. But please, while you listen, kindly power tap. And I want to thank all those who have power tapped so far. Thank you very much. But please, let's keep it going, especially on TikTok, so that way we can keep the live alive. Okay, literally. All right, thank you very much. So let's get started with the description. All right. For decades, many voices from the southeast have echoed the chant, "On Aburi we stand," as though Aburi holds a mystical solution to Nigeria's problems. That was carefully shaped by Ojukwu and his propaganda machinery and sold as a story of permanent victimhood and promised redemption. What really gets mentioned is that the Aburi decisions were not ignored or buried. They were implemented in Decree 8 of March 17, 1967. That single fact changes the entire conversation and forces a deeper look at what Aburi really meant and what followed after. Before we even touch the decree itself, we need to clear one major distortion. Nigeria's history did not begin with the July 29 counter-coup. A lot had already happened. Power had shifted. Decisions had been taken. Tensions had been escalated. This video walks through that full journey, from the first coup to the road that led to Aburi. Once you see the sequence clearly, the slogans lose their magic and the history becomes harder to bend. This is The Road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. Please power tap as you listen to this recording. Let's try and get the live going because, of course, you know that I can't stop since we're not coming on camera. So please keep power tapping and keep liking the live and sharing as well. Thank you very much for your support. All right, again, this is The Road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. Enjoy.
Today, we are revisiting Aburi. We've had this session before, but there are some things I didn't share, like I said earlier. I think it's important to share some of those things today. Now, why are we discussing this? It's because, so I put out some videos last week. Of course, we put out videos every day on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, different platforms, TikTok. And one of the commenters, instead of talking about Aburi Accord, and I saw one today. I saw some on Twitter. I saw another one on YouTube today about why it went the way it did, how everybody is standing on Aburi. People still say they're standing on Aburi in 2026. Let me start by saying this: if you're from the southeast and you're standing on Aburi, you're standing on nonsense. Jesus is the only solid drug that should be standing on since 19 today, 1967. All of that ground is sinking sand, including Aburi. You cannot be standing on Aburi in 2026. It's actually very shallow. People think it's deep. It's nonsense. And I'll tell you why. Aburi was resolved. Some things came out of Aburi. People don't talk about it because they want to maintain we are the victim of Nigeria narrative. They want to maintain we are the victim of Nigeria narrative. So the whole thing about Aburi is usually not discussed because it doesn't help with that narrative. But I want also see some things, from different perspectives on that particular matter. Like I said, I don't usually talk about the Igbo perspective because we have been subjected to it willingly or unwillingly for the last 60 plus years. At this point, we have to wean people off of it like you win a baby off of breast milk. It's enough. Let's eat solid food by listening to other people. I mean, the milk we got is okay. Although, to be honest, the milk we've gotten all these years, now contaminated milk, is sour, it's deadly, it's terrible. So let's have something nutritious, okay? Having said that, we might go back to the beginning just a bit so we understand exactly what happened. I'll be reading this book by Ẹkáàbọ, The Struggle for Secession, right? That's by Ẹkáàbọ. He was the secretary to the government of the Eastern region. He worked with Ojukwu directly, and he wrote a lot about what happened in Aburi. But I'm going to start by reading the book by IBB, A Journey in Service. I also probably should read Nigerian Civil War by John Desenjo. We're going to have a great time today, by the way. Very, very great time. And we'll tie everything together. There's any things that we've not talked about before. We'll talk about today, e.g., documents from United States, their own, shall I call it, classified documents that we now have access to on what happened around that time. We've been lied to in this country. Let's just put it that way. We are being lied to. Let me start by saying this before I even read this, because without saying this, it couldn't make sense. So we know that a coup happened in January 15, 1966. It was an Igbo coup. And I'll probably come back to talk about what happened between January and July some other time. But a lot of people have said that what happened in May in the North was actually payback for as unalived January of 66. That is not true. That is not true. What happened in May was not retribution for what happened in January. It was actually retribution for what people did on their own between January and May. What the people did, when I say people, I mean Igbo people did in the North, what Ironsi did, the kind of decrees they promulgated, and the things that Igbo started doing in different parts of the country. That was what led to what happened in May 66. We'll have that conversation some other day. The payback for January was actually July. Again, I don't say these things to justify terrible things that happened to people. Nobody should die the way people died. It was terrible. But it's important to actually put things in context. I was listening to an intellectual from the Southeast some days ago. My mentor sent me a video of this gentleman, and then he said something that's quite revealing. He said that the Igbo story begins in July of 1966. I was like, no wonder. That's what he said. He said the Igbo story began July 1966. If that's where your history began, your story of Nigeria, if that's where it began, then you are in trouble, because you are going to live your entire life being a victim. You are conditioned to be a victim. If your story started, or if your story starts in July, what happened in the first 6 months of 1966 can actually show you exactly what happened long before 66 and why what has happened since 66 has happened, right? So what happened, of course, we've talked about it. There was a coup in January. A lot of people were unalive. The Premier of the North, the Premier of the West, the Prime Minister, Federal Minister of Finance, Okotiebo, was killed. I didn't mention the other Premier, so I have to go all over again. Premier of the North, Salvador Bello. Premier of the West, Laduke Akintola, SLA. The Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, Minister of Finance, Okotiebo, and a lot of military officers. So in the West, you have people like Ademule Gumb, was a brigadier, and his wife, Latifa, who was 8 months pregnant, was killed by these clowns. You have, that's what's killing Rafshoda Inde, right? Sorry, guys. Let me help this clown go, because if I don't, you'll be disturbing me. All right. I don't usually block people. I just mute you so you can listen with your ears and give your fingers a rest. Where was I? They killed all these people, right? When it comes to, we're not known as a kid with malaria, like Gema and Pam and Kerr Mohammed, and just unalived a lot of people, right? particularly folks who were not Igbos. There was one Igbo man that was killed at Onegbe. Now, it said it was because he was the quartermaster general, but regardless, he was killed. But not one Igbo politician was killed in January, and a lot of officers were also killed. 4 in the north, 2 from the west. I'm going to have a section where we're going to discuss what happened from the perspective of other people. Like I mentioned what Babafemi Ogundepe said last time. I'll talk about what Colonel Adebayo, what they said, after the whole thing. We'll talk about it some other day, maybe on Wednesday. Anyway, all of that led to Ironsi becoming head of state, which was, by the way, the design. It was planned that way. Originally, it was supposed to be Christine Badiwe, Ozuma Badiwe was supposed to be prime minister, and he tried. Right? It's just that the NPC did not agree because he was a member of NCNC. It should have been Bukar Tipcharima, but somehow, they wanted it to be an Igbo man. So would have ended up with an Igbo president, Azikiwe, an Igbo Senate president, one for Rizu, an Igbo Prime Minister, Ozuma Badiwe, an Igbo GOC, Agui Rossi. Therefore, we have an Igbo land, essentially. So they didn't agree, and therefore they came up with the plan B, which was Ironsi. Ironsi takes over, begins to change the structure of Nigeria, abolishes the regional system, came up with this idea that everybody has to be together based on the recommendation of one person, Francis Owokedi, who essentially submitted a report that was written by Igbo leaders in NCNC. And all of that was going on. Decree 24 came up. Decree 34 came up on May 24, 1966, right? All kinds of nonsense were just being promulgated, and Northerners had enough of it. They struck in May. It was May 29. It was terrible and should never happen again. That led to different things, eventually led to what happened in July, because the Northerners were still suspecting that the Easterners said, there were rumors that they were going to finish what they started in January. In other words, they were going to kill more folks from the north. So they struck in Abeokuta, in Ibadan, and of course in Ikeja and in the north, right? They couldn't strike in Enugu because of the peculiarities and the person of Ogunewe. Anyway, while that was going on, this is a very fast introduction. While that was going on, the Northerners who planned that coup to revenge what happened in January actually planned to break out of Nigeria. And so they called the coup itself Araba, right? And they decided to appoint the most senior person in the whole military, in the north. The most senior military officer who was Northerner was Gowon. So they made him the head of state. And so between July 29 and August 1, we didn't have a head of state in Nigeria, just to be clear. But by August 1st, Gowon becomes head of state. Now, while that was going on, people were still being killed, particularly in the north. A lot of people from the east were moving back in droves to the east from the north, right? And all of this led to, there were massacres. And I've said this before, that while people were leaving the north, originally the target was soldiers, right? So about between 24 and 28 people thereabouts died in January, which was terrible. But by July, over 200 people were killed, about 280 or so. Many of them, of course, officers, were unalived. Now it was now getting to the civilians. People were rushing back to the east. As they were going back home, they went with the tales of their woes, right? People died, people suffered. When they got home, they told their people what had happened. What Igbo people did in the east, after hearing the news of what happened to their people who were coming back from the north, Bolo Afo, was actually witnessed by certain foreigners, right? And they took the news, through them, the news got to Radio Cotonou in Benin Republic. So it was announced that, listen, a lot of people died. We've had sessions on this before, by the way. We read books. You find some of these accounts in the Nigerian Civil War by John Desenjo. You also find it in Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria by H.M. Kirk Green. So you also find the sunset in Biafra by Elechi Amadi, how Northerners were killed and put in trains. A lot of terrible things happen. How, for instance, a train that was carrying about 2,000 Northerners from the east to the north was stopped by Igbo soldiers, and all the males there, right, were killed and thrown into the Imo River. Right, a lot of terrible things happened. So when the news got to Benin Republic, they broadcast it on Radio Cotonou, in French, of course. Folks in the north heard it, rebroadcast it in English language and in Hausa. The people heard what happened to their own people in the north. They now began to kill Igbos in the north. Which was, again, none of these things justifies anything. It's just to say that this is what happened. Began to kill of Easterners. By October, the Eastern region published a document called Pogrom. The word pogrom came into the lexicon, into Nigerian lexicon, not because anybody called it a pogrom, but because the Eastern region called it a pogrom. Was it a pogrom? I don't believe it was a pogrom. I think it was a massacre. It was terrible killings, but it was not a pogrom, if you go by the definition of pogroms. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, the Eastern region published a pamphlet called Pogrom, and in that pamphlet, at the time, by the way, Ojukwu was the head of state. Ojukwu was the governor of the region. There was no Biafra at the time. Ojukwu was the one who put out that document, and he said 7,000 people died, in the north. Like 7,000 Igbo people died in the north, which was terrible, right? That was in October. Now, these things eventually led to, I've jumped some things actually. In September, I have to go back to August. In August 1st was when Yakubu Gowon became head of state, right? 2nd August was when he released Papa Awolowo from prison, which is quite interesting considering that Ironsi was there for 6 months and he did not release Awolowo, but this man released him 2nd day. By the way, let me digress a little. If you read on a Darkling Plain by Ken Saro-Wiwa, he reported that Ojukwu sent a telegram to Awolowo as soon as he was released, and he claimed that Awo's release from prison was the last act of Ironsi. That's what Ojukwu said in that telegram, right? That Awolowo being released from prison from Calabar was actually the last act by Ironsi. Fast forward to 2001, Ojukwu was interviewed by Boston newspaper. You see this report in the Forgotten Documents of Nigerian Civil War by Odiel Famon. Ojukwu said he was the one who released Awolowo from prison. Here's the truth. Neither what he said in 66 nor what he said in 2001 was the truth. He lied. Ironsi did not release Awolowo from prison. He had 6 months. Awolowo wrote him a letter in March of 1966. You find a letter in his book, My March Through Prison. And we should have a session on Papa very soon. Maybe even that prison episode. He wrote a letter to Ironsi. He published this letter in the book, and Ironsi did not do anything about it. Anyway, the point is, the idea that Ojukwu released out from prison is the nonsense that people bandy about. But even Ojukwu himself said it was Ironsi before it now came up later, about 40 years later, to say it was the one who did it, which is absolute nonsense, right? He didn't. He couldn't, by the way. He was not the head of state. He was just the governor of a ragtag, whatever. Ad hoc conference, right? That's thought leaders from different regions gathered, in Lagos in September. Rather than Ojukwu sending people to go for that conference, Ojukwu was bombing everywhere. Ojukwu bombed Ore Bridge, not in 67. That's not today's topic. I'm just giving you like an overview, so you see so that by the time we get to Aburi, it will make sense. I don't like just jumping to topic. It doesn't make sense to me. I like context. Okay, maybe it's my training, but I'm sure you don't mind. Anyway, September, Ojukwu was bombing Ore Bridge in present-day Ondo State, far away from whatever he called his Biafra. And there was no Biafra by then, by the way. Biafra was not going to be declared until May 30, 1967. This was September 1966. They were going to have the meeting at a place called Federal Palace Hotel, in Lagos. And what Ojukwu did was to send his guys there. And so what did Ojukwu do? He sent his guys to bomb the venue of that meeting, of the ad hoc conference in Lagos. So they bombed that place. It was an Igbo man who bombed it. And to make matters worse, he was planning to do it again. So he went home, put certain things together. It was while he was trying to do it again that he himself was bombed. So that's his additional blessing. So they've been bombing since then. So he got bombed into pieces while he was trying to do it again. Yeah, but there was a vehicle that was discovered in front, and I think I should read this part, by the way, because I didn't read anything I've said so far because we've had sessions here where we discussed it. If you don't believe any of those things, please go to our YouTube channel and then you watch us read some of those documents. I'll just quickly read something. It was Agu. That's the name I'm trying to remember. Agu was the name of the person. Agu and Sons from Onitsha. They owned the tanker where they stored. That's actually, I don't have to read anymore. That's what I was trying to get. They loaded a tanker with explosives and they parked it somewhere. They repeated that same thing, of course, at Casino Hotel in Yaba. They did the same thing in Ikoyi, just unaliving people because they didn't like what was going on. I'll read something very quickly from Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria by H.M. Kirk Green, if you would oblige me. Okay, let me just go back to some of the things I've discussed already. I read only this book on that matter, okay? On his assumption of office, Major General Gowon set in motion the machinery for finding a lasting solution to Nigeria's problems. He ordered the release of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who was leader of the opposition in the federal parliament until his imprisonment in 1963, Chief Anthony Nauro, and other political prisoners and detainees. An immediate return to the federal system of government. C. The summoning on 12 September 1966 an ad hoc conference on constitutional proposals comprising representatives of all the regions of the federation. This conference was preceded by consultative conferences in all areas in the regions. By the way, we're speaking here, this is Anthony Nauro speaking on 12th August 1968, and it was published in the book by H.M. Kirk Green, Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria, Volume 2. So he says the third one was the summoning on 12 September 1966 of an ad hoc conference on constitutional proposals comprising representatives of all the regions of the Federation. This conference was preceded by consultative conferences in all areas in the regions. At these consultative conferences, the issue of the creation of more states in the Federation was revived, and memoranda were submitted demanding that the basic cause of dissatisfaction, i.e. the imbalance in the federal structure, should be removed. Again, let me quickly say this. The call for state creation surfaced again in September of 66 before Ojukwu declared Biafra. But guess what? That was not the first time it was surfacing. 11 years prior, in 1955, folks in the eastern region, in the western region, and in the northern region pushed hard. They've been pushing before them, by the way, but 55 was a very momentous occasion, so to speak. What happened was that there was going to be a constitutional conference in London, so they were pushing very hard. They wanted to have their own states. Midwest had been pushing since the 40s, got very serious in 52. COR was pushing in the 40s alongside the folks in southern Cameroon. Folks in COR were talking about having their own state in 55. By 57, there was a commission of inquiry that was set up by the British colonial government called the Willings Commission, and they had a report in 58. Why am I saying this? Because when you jump Nigeria in 67, Gowon destroyed everywhere and created states. The idea of state wasn't even a Gowon idea. It started before Gowon even joined the army. Before independence, they've been talking about having their own states. And there's a paper by the man's name, I think it's Aburi. I'll read this. There was an interview granted where he talked about what he did in this ad hoc conference and how he pushed for the creation of Rivers State back then. So just to say that state creation actually favored the minorities, although Igbos didn't want them to go. And I'm saying Igbos specifically. And I've said it before here, and I'll say it again. You see, in 1957, when the Willings Commission started sitting, there were three groups that wanted to break out of the existing regions: the Midwest, the Middle Belt, and the COR. Now, the North did not want the Middle Belt to go, right? The West was okay with the Midwest going as long as COR was also going to go. They didn't touch the Middle Belt because they had an agreement with the North at the time, which didn't even pay us eventually. But that was the agreement at the time. Excuse me. The East, by the way, this happened in London in 55 before the 57 showdown. The East, led by Zeke and his party at the time, What is COR? COR is Calabar, Ogoja, Rivers provinces. So COR will be present the Akwa Ibom, Cross River State, River State, and most of Bayelsa State. I said most because a part, not very big, a small part of Bayelsa used to be part of Western region back in the day. Okay, so by 55, let's start with 55. 55, when they're discussing creation of states, the North didn't want the Middle Belt to go. The West did not mind the Midwest going, as long as the COR will also be leaving the Eastern region, because the Western region was the smallest of the three at the time. But the East did not want the COR to go. They didn't want the Eastern minorities to go. And they didn't talk about the North, but they said that the Western region should be broken into 4. Tells you how diabolical people can be. Now, but I won't go into all of those things as Ezekiel did in 55. Now, 57, 58, they had the Commission of Inquiry. The North didn't say much. The East, of course, was still against it. The Western region was the only region that made a case for another region to go out of it, to be excised out of it. There were three groups of people that made a case for Midwest in 1957-58. The Midwest themselves, the Western region, and Action Group. Everything I just said right now, you'll find in a document called Willings Commission Report. You had the ad hoc conference in 1966 September. The folks the folks in COR, right, they now began to speak again about creation of states. This had nothing to do with Biafra. There was nothing called Biafra. Again, the idea of their own state had been there before Ojukwu even joined the army. So it wasn't about Ojukwu or about, they just wanted to be able to, it's self-determination. They wanted to be able to govern their own space. Just like the Eastern region the Midwest got what they got in 63, they also wanted to get their own state. So let's continue reading now. At these consultative conferences, the issue of the creation of more states in the Federation was revived, and memoranda were submitted demanding that the basic cause of dissatisfaction, i.e. the imbalance in the federal structure, should be removed. Major General Gowon also announced that the country would return to civilian rule as soon as it could be arranged. The Constitutional Conference already referred to was preceded by terrorist bomb outrages in Lagos and at the Ore Bridge on the trunk road from Lagos to the east. When was this? September 1966. Ojukwu was already bombing places in Lagos and Ore in September. This was not Olekwija Ore of August of 67 that Biafra was trying to invade. No, this was just being a nuisance. The Constitutional Conference already referred to was preceded by terrorist bomb outrages in Lagos and at the Ore Bridge on the trunk road from Lagos to the east, organized by Ojukwu's administration. Plans for large-scale sabotage in several parts of the country were uncovered. Some senior Igbo officials under the direction of Ojukwu's government were actually arrested in the process of blowing up the railway and road bridges in Kaduna, the Kaduna Stadium, waterworks, post offices, and powerhouses. Quantities of explosives were discovered and impounded by police in Kaduna, Kano, and Jos. In the midst of all this, Mr. Ojukwu continued recklessly to inflame passions. His radio was preaching hate, defiance, and revenge, and all Igbos were being publicly called back to the east because, as he alleged, they were not safe elsewhere in the country. By the way, he was also sending people out of the east. And he did that particularly because he was trying to create space for the people that were returning. But it wasn't very smart because people that were returning were more than people that were leaving. Let's continue. His radio, that's Radio Biafra, his radio was preaching, in the midst of all this, Mr. Ojukwu continued recklessly to inflame passions. His radio was preaching hate, defiance, and revenge. And all Igbos were being publicly called back to the east because, as he alleged, they were not safe elsewhere in the country. A few heeded the official call, but most were pressured by threatening telegrams in the east to return home. Towards the end of September 1966, Constitutional Conference, which Major General Gowon had set up, had made good progress, justifying his hopes for an early return to civilian rule. Unfortunately, the work of the committee was rudely interrupted by the outbreak of disturbances late in September 1966. At this time, Nigerians of northern origin living in the former eastern region were attacked by Igbos. Many of them were killed, others maimed and injured. This was between 20th September and 28th September 1966. The attacks on northerners took place in Port Harcourt, Abakaliki, Oji River, and Onitsha. By the way, if you read the Nigerian Civil War by John Desenjo, you have more details of the attacks and some other parts of this book as well, what really happened, but it's not to this topic. But a lot of Northerners were killed, and just explains why what happened in September happened. News of these attacks were first broadcast over Radio Cotonou in Dahomey and other foreign radio stations, and subsequently over Radio Kaduna. Northerners in Igbo land fled back to the north. Many of those who tried to escape were collected, massacred, and dumped into Imo River by Igbo assailants. The Northerners retaliated by attacking Igbos living in the north. The riots of 29 September and the resulting death toll might have been avoided if Ojukwu and his group had recognized 29th July 1966 as the antithesis of 15th January. In other words, what happened in 29th July was the retribution for what happened in 15th January. In other words, you killed people. 15th January was an Igbo coup, through and through. 29th July was a northern coup, through and through. Here's the funny thing in Nigeria. I've never seen a northerner cry about the fact that 29th July coup was a northern coup. It's only the ones that always throwing tantrums was an Igbo coup. Okay? So, Anthony Naro is saying here that all that happened on September would have been avoided if Ojukwu and his group had recognized that 29th July 1966 was the antithesis of 15th January and genuinely sought a basis for saving the country. On the contrary, they were full of threats and revenge, and rumors set several dates for it. A bomb incident in Lagos in mid-September 1966, in which an Igbo official tried to blow up public buildings, designed to prevent the meeting of the Constitutional Conference called by General Gowon, confirmed such fears. Such an explosive atmosphere could only produce further tragedy. It has since become clear that Ojukwu deliberately provoked this tragic chain of events in order to justify his plot to pull the former Eastern region out of Nigeria. So he went on to talk about the meetings. He also mentioned what Papa did, and I think I should read that because posterity will judge Papa kindly. He's even judging him kindly, thank God. Let me read this to you in a vacuum. This description of the sequence of events is not an attempt to excuse the death tolls of, I'll tell that again. This description of the sequence of events is not an attempt to excuse the death toll of Igbos in the north or Northerners in Igbo land during the tragic riots at the end of September. The federal government and the then Northern Regional Government publicly condemned the killings and acted decisively to stop them, while Ojukwu offered no regrets. In other words, even way back in 1966, the federal government was saying sorry about what happened in the east. The Northern Regional Government was saying sorry about what happened in the north. Ojukwu did not tell anybody sorry for what happened to others in his region because they are victims. Let's continue. I mean, they were victims, to be clear, but they were not the only victims. They were also aggressors. So he says here, this description of the sequence of events is not an attempt to excuse the death toll of Igbos in the north or Northerners in Igbo land during the tragic riots at the end of September. The federal government and the then Northern Regional Government publicly condemned the killings and acted decisively to stop them, while Ojukwu offered no regrets. Indeed, in his impromptu address to the Constitutional Conference on 3rd October 1966, General Gowon said, "Gentlemen, I will tell you this. Certainly there has been a damage. I think that is what we never seem to admit when there is something like that. There is a damage and I am very, very sorry about it. I regret it and I am doing everything I can. As I said, for God's sake, don't lose hope. If we are alive and if we are determined, we can get this country." I'll take that again, excuse me. If we are alive and if we are determined, we can get this country back to its proper shape. I am determined to do that even if it means my life. I give you my word for it. To our Eastern friends, for God's sake, Please don't lose hope. Let us try and see what we can do to mend what has happened. Give me a chance, and I am quite convinced I will be able to do something very shortly. When was this? 3rd October 1966. It is regrettable that the rebel regime has viciously exploited this tragedy in their propaganda while conveniently ignoring killings of other Nigerians in Igbo land. From the tragic events of 1966, all sections of Nigeria have learned their lessons. There is no reason why the pattern should be repeated, given the will to overcome them. Nigerians must forgive one another, even if all sections of the country which suffered in one way or another from these events cannot forget. It is necessary to stage, I'll tell that again, it is necessary at this stage to recall the long history of efforts at conciliation from October 1966 to May 1967. The East to refrain from action against the illegal actions and defiance of federal government by Mr. Ojukwu illustrates clearly the conciliatory approach of the federal military government. In spite of the following outrageous acts directed by Mr. Ojukwu, the federal government continued its efforts to persuade the East to reason and cooperate. The seizure within the region of more than 1/3 of the rolling stock of the Nigerian Railway, including 800 wagons and 115 oil tankers, this is what Ojukwu was doing. This was before Aburi. Apart from the fact that he bombed Federal Palace Hotel in Lagos, he bombed Ore. All of this in 66. This was before Aburi. The denial of port facilities to export from northern region, persistent obstruction of the movements to the north of oil products from the refinery owned by all the governments in Nigeria, including that of the northern region, the seizure of property belonging to a foreign government, the neighboring Republic of Chad, the seizure of large bond traffic on the international waterway of the River Niger bound for the friendly republics of Niger and Cameroon, the expulsion since October 66 of all non-Easterners from the East. If you want to know exactly how this thing played out, please read Ojukwu's Rebellion and World Opinion by Neighbor Graham Douglas. You'll see how interesting that took place. All these outrageous acts were overlooked by the federal government in the belief that time was needed for Mr. Ojukwu and his group to come around to discuss how best to restore the country to normal conditions. Again, after the Aburi conference held in Ghana in January 67, a decree number 8 was introduced which completely decentralized the country even beyond the original demands of Mr. Ojukwu and beyond the provisions of the Nigerian Federal Constitution. The decree was unacceptable to Ojukwu because it contained a clause which provided against secession. Now we are going to get into what happened in 67 January. We're coming back to this book. Let's go to when I get there, I'll let you know which one. Let's go to Johnny in Service by IBB. The country was locked in a national stalemate until Lieutenant General Joseph Arthur Ankara, who had become Ghana's head of state after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, stepped in by suggesting a neutral and safe venue for an actual reconciliation conference between Ojukwu and the federal government. In other words, there's another book I should have read, but I'm not going to read it now. Go On, the biography of a soldier statesman, talked about all the meetings they were having, and Ojukwu just decided not to attend. There was the adult conference that I mentioned in September, where his people went to bomb Federal Palace Hotel. There were other meetings for the regional governors. He was just not attending. They were even moving meetings because of him. He still would not go. It has something to do with something else. We'll talk about that later. But let's continue here. So, Ghana Head of State and General stepped in and suggested a neutral and safe venue for an actual reconciliation conference between Ojukwu and the federal government. So we are in Aburi now. All of that was introduction. This is the topic. That intervention, seen as the last chance to prevent an all-out war, led to the famous peace conference in the southern regional town of Ghana, Aburi, between January 4 and 5, 1967. That conference between the Eastern Nigerian delegation led by Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu and the federal delegation led by Lieutenant Colonel Gowon resulted in the famous Aburi Accord. I want to read what happened in that accord. Now that we're done with our introduction, I hope you enjoyed the introduction, by the way. I think it's a better way to study history rather than just pick something and be shouting, it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad. Kilo shele, kiyen to shele, kilo bin ko to shele. What happened before the actual event so that you understand stuff beyond headlines. All right, what's that book called? N.U. Akpan, The Struggle for Secession. I want to read this book because N.U. Akpan was not on the Nigerian side, was on the Biafran side. So I want to look at things from his perspective, and then we'll move to another perspective later. With the failure of the ad hoc Constitutional Conference, I'm reading The Struggle for Secession by N.U. Akpan. N.U. Akpan was the secretary to the government of the Eastern region, and he worked with Ojukwu. With the failure of the ad hoc Constitutional Conference and its eventual indefinite suspension, the prospects of peace and unity for Nigeria seriously deteriorated. Many people, both in Nigeria and abroad, were alarmed by the increasing possibility that the East might secede from the rest of the Federation. It was this alarm and fear which brought the British High Commissioner in Nigeria, Sir Francis Cumming Bruce, and the American ambassador to Nigeria, Mr. Herbert Matthews, all the way from Lagos to Enugu, to persuade the military governor to work for a peaceful solution and the unity of Nigeria. They also issued a mild warning in diplomatic fashion against secession. This was in 1966. The military governor gave them every assurance that the East had no intention whatsoever of seceding, unless forced to do so. But these experienced diplomats appeared to see deeper than the governor realized. For after the meeting, the British High Commissioner, on behalf of himself and the American ambassador, wrote to the governor an account of what they had understood from him and what they had said to him, and reminded him at the same time of his undertaking to publish the exchanges. Some of the things that they discussed then with the American guys, with the American ambassador and the British High Commissioner, we're going to read later today. We should be able to read it before we go today. Let's continue. As a gesture of goodwill, to show the East that the rest of the Federation cared about and regretted the atrocities directed against Easterners in a section of the country, a delegation of Western Nigeria, Obas and chiefs visited Enugu, as did a delegation of top federal civil servants, trying to find out what exactly the East wanted in order to cooperate for unity and peace in the country. This was before Aburi. Why are they coming? Because he refused to attend it. For instance, there was a meeting that was supposed to hold on August 9th. It did not go. There's another one that was supposed to hold in November. Let me read that one. All subsequent persuasions, promises, and overtures failed to make the East change its mind. The conference again adjourned until November 17th. On November 16th, when it was absolutely clear that efforts to make the East participate would never succeed unless their conditions were accepted, and with the federal government unwilling to concede to the conditions, the head of state adjourned the conference indefinitely. So they were having several meetings. The other conference, the only representative Ojukwu sent to Lagos were the ones who came to bomb Federal Palace Hotel. So while it was just being recalcitrant, essentially, just being a baby, what the government did was to keep sending emissaries. They sent Yoruba people, they sent your kings to talk to this guy. At this time, Ojukwu was barely 34, 33, 34, was very young. Kings went to talk to him. High commissioners, ambassadors, he must have just thought that it was all that. So they went there to know exactly what the East wanted in order to cooperate for unity and peace in the country. As a follow-up to the visit by the top British and American diplomats already mentioned, the American consul and the British Deputy High Commissioner in Enugu, Messrs. Robert Bernard and Jim Parker, respectively, paid many visits to the State House, carrying messages from their principals to the governor. Nor were diplomats from other countries idle. They came to Enugu in turn with messages and pleas for the unity and peace of Nigeria. In November 1966, Seeing the dangerous trends in the East, I contacted my counterparts among the secretaries of the military government in the North, West, Midwest, and Lagos, urging that we owed a duty to the country not to sit idle while it was thus burning. The first person I spoke to was Alhaji Ali Akilu of the North, and I was encouraged by his ready acceptance that we should meet. He even offered to come to Enugu if necessary. All of us, the secretaries of the military government, met in Benin. Such was the importance I attached to the meeting that I had to leave the dead body of my own sister in Enugu in order to attend. At the meeting, I was able to tell them as forcefully as I could of my fears and apprehensions. Later, the head of state in his usual generous way thanked me when we met in Aburi for my small efforts to bring about peace and understanding. We all agreed that's Gowon. When he said the head of state thanked him in Aburi, that was Gowon appreciating what he did in November. We all agreed that the situation was extremely serious and urgent. We therefore decided to do all in our power to bring about a meeting of the military governors. Immediately following our meeting was that of the advisors to the respective military governors. They too agreed to the urgent need for the military leaders to meet and accordingly pledged their immense influence to bring about such a meeting in order to save the country. And they issued a public appeal to this effect. Lastly came the personal efforts of Mr. Malcolm MacDonald, that well-known veteran of British diplomacy. He visited the East more than once, commuting between Lagos and Enugu. He spoke to the governor both in Enugu and at Onitsha. His efforts ultimately put the seal to all discussions and secret moves to bring about a meeting of Nigerian military leaders outside the country. Thus, it was a combination of many efforts involving hard work and seasoned diplomacy, which eventually brought about the famous meeting of Nigerian military leaders at Aburi, a meeting which has already assumed a prominent place in the history of Nigeria. It does not appear that the governor's personal advisors had much of a say while the discussions for the meeting were going on between the governor and the different intermediaries. Who were these advisors? We talked about them, but the people that Neighbor Graham Douglas referred to as the Nnewi clique. So the people just goading him, like pushing him, edging him on, like he should just continue destroying the place. Let's continue. It does not appear, I'm still reading N.U. Akwan's book, The Struggle for Secession. It does not appear that the governor's personal advisors had much of a say while the discussions for the meeting were going on between the governor and different intermediaries. They no doubt knew about them, but probably did not believe that anything concrete would be achieved. I say this because immediately the final arrangements were concluded, they raised the usual alarm about the governor's personal safety in Ghana. His Nigerian enemies could quite easily arrange to kill or kidnap him there, they pointed out, mentioning the presence of many Hausas in Ghana, and Hausas, of course, were resolute enemies, quote-unquote, of Easterners and their leaders. In other words, when Ojukwu was about to go, his Nnewi clique were like, they're going to kill him in Ghana, because Hausas have many in Ghana. They hate Igbos. This hate nonsense you hear these days, they've been saying it for a long time. Let's continue. His Nigerian enemies could quite easily arrange to kill or kidnap him there, they pointed out, mentioning the presence of many Hausas in Ghana, and Hausas, of course, were resolute, quote-unquote, enemies of Easterners and their leaders. Fortunately, the personal advisors were a little late on this occasion. The governor had already given his word to Mr. Malcolm MacDonald and through him to General Ankara that he would attend the meeting. General Ankara had not only guaranteed the governor's personal safety and that of his aides, but had undertaken to send a Ghanaian Air Force plane to collect him from Enugu and take him back afterwards. All the same, to make doubly sure, security men from Enugu were sent to Ghana to check on the security arrangements before the governor would go. We arrived on schedule at Ghana Airport and found security arrangements almost too rigid. The Eastern Nigerian delegation were received at a different time and maybe even a different place from the other delegations. We arrived nearly an hour ahead of the other delegations, which arrived in the Nigerian Airways Fokker Friendship. After thorough searches of our persons and luggage, we were taken in helicopters and cars to Aburi, once more arriving before the other delegations. The delegations from Lagos arrived wreathed in smiles and full of expectancy. A number of them, among them the head of state and the military governor of the West, were particularly exuberant and warm. calling our governor by his first name and even offering to embrace him. But our governor was serious, unsmiling and cold, refusing in fact to accept any embrace. Eventually, we all took our seats. Recording instruments had been installed. General Ankara opened the meeting with advice and prayers that the discussions and deliberations be approached with a deep sense of fraternity, understanding, and give and take. He was not going to chair the meeting and would not even participate in the discussions in order not to detract from Nigeria's sovereignty, but would be on hand with some members of his National Liberation Council in case their help and assistance were needed for anything. He had made available competent secretarial service for the meeting. The meeting started without any officially accepted chairman, but it was obvious that Colonel Gowon, as it then was, took precedence. But our governor, however, would not allow this to be taken too far. For at the end of General Ankara's introductory remarks, both Colonel Ojukwu and Colonel Gowon replied in turn. I think it was Colonel Gowon who spoke first. Before the discussions began, Colonel Ojukwu said there was something preliminary but vital which he would like done before anything else. All agreed that he should say what it was. In measured tones and with dramatic sincerity, he proposed that as a means of inspiring confidence, they should all do two things. A, reaffirm their faith in discussions and negotiations as the only peaceful means of resolving the Nigerian crisis. And B, renounce the use of force as a means of settling the present crisis in Nigeria and hold ourselves in honor bound by the declaration. It appeared quite innocuous, and the meeting saw no objection to the proposals, which we at once accepted without argument. I shall return to this in the next chapter. The discussions proceeded, and our governor was clearly the star performer. I'll say that again, and it's the truth. The discussions proceeded, and our governor was clearly the star performer. Everyone wanted to please and concede to him. Although on a few occasions, Colonel Hassan, the military governor of the North, and Major Mobolaji Johnson, the administrator of the Lagos Territory, threw in some harsh and contrary views. But on the whole, the meeting went on in a most friendly and cordial atmosphere, which made us, the non-military observers, develop a genuine respect and admiration for the military men and their sense of comradeship. 1 second. All right, thank you very much for staying tuned. I want to read something to you from Gowon, the biography of a soldier statesman by J. Sawa Laigo. Oh, great. We're here. Took us a while, but we're finally here. So we're here. Gowon, the biography of a soldier statesman by J. Sawa Laigo. So I'm going to read some of the things that also confirm the things that we saw in the book by Akpan. At Aburi, the military leaders agreed to renounce the use of force as a means of settling Nigeria's crisis. That's one. Number two, reaffirm their belief in One, the army was to be governed by the Supreme Military Council.
Number two, the military headquarters in which each region was to be represented was to be set up under a chief of staff. Number three, let me take this with you because we're going to come back to this. So, let's take this with you. So we know the things that Ojukwu said they should do, but these are the things they agreed to. Number one, the army was to be governed by the Supreme Military Council, the chairman of which also.
Rex, I'm busy. What is happening now? Just go, I'll come back, I'll call you later.
The military headquarters in which each region was to be represented was to be set up under a chief of staff. Number three, in each region was to be an area command under an area commander. Number four, the SMC was to be
area commander. Number four, the SMC was to deal with all matters of appointment and promotions of people in executive posts in the armed forces and the police. And number five, military governors for the duration of the military government were to have control over area commands in their regions for purposes of internal security. With regard to appointments in public service, all appointments into 1. Diplomatic and consular posts, 2. Senior posts in the armed forces and the police, and 3. Super-scale federal civil service and federal corporation posts were to be made by the SMC. These and other executive and legislative decisions affecting the whole country must be determined by the SMC, and in the absence of a meeting, be referred to all the regional military governors for their concurrence and comments. By the way, let me explain. We need to appreciate Gowon. What they are saying here is that Gowon was not like Ironsi, who was called the Supreme Commander. They are saying that rather than have a Supreme Commander, we're going to have a Supreme Military. But it's not the one that will just say anything and all of us have to do it as a decree. We have to agree. And they are saying yes. I'll come back to some of these things later. So you see how Nigeria bent over backwards for Ojukwu. And the ridiculousness of Wisan or Aburi nonsense that they're always saying today. It makes absolutely no sense. But let's continue. So these are the things they agreed to in Aburi. Let's continue. This and other executive and legislative decisions affecting the whole country must be determined by the SMC. And in the absence of a meeting, be referred to all the regional military governors for their concurrence and comments. In the final communique, the military leaders agreed that future meetings were to be held in Nigeria in a location to be announced later. All of them expressed regret about the bloodshed in 1966 and vowed to prevent its recurrence. There was no doubt that Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu stole the show from his colleagues. Overly enthusiastic about conciliating, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, I'll tell us slowly. Let me just start again. There was no doubt that Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu stole the show from his colleagues. Overly enthusiastic about conciliating Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, Lieutenant Colonel Gowon and the other military leaders on the federal side lost much ground to Ojukwu, consciously or unconsciously. It was no wonder then that Ojukwu asked the secretary, Mr. N.U. Akpan, the one whose book we just read, after the conference, quote, "Why were those people so jubilant? Do you think they have grasped the full implications of the decisions they have taken?" End of quote. They apparently did not. And it took top federal civil servants to point out that if every letter of the agreement were followed, it would mean Nigeria's disintegration. But Ojukwu did not keep his own side of the bargain on the Aburi arrangements. The military leaders were reported to have agreed among themselves that all civilian advisors, including federal permanent secretaries, were to be kept out of the Aburi meeting. But Ojukwu, contrary to the gentleman's agreement, took with him about 9 permanent secretaries and other senior official advisors to the meeting. A federal permanent secretary, Mr. Edwin Ogbu, who had visited Accra on official business, had reported to Gowon that some permanent secretaries and advisors from the Eastern region had arrived at Accra a day or two before the conference. But Gowon refused to break his agreement with Ojukwu, in spite of advice that there was no point adhering to an agreement the terms of which the other party was not keeping. That was Gowon, straightforward and honest in his dealings. This was to be seen throughout his rule. It was a good quality in interpersonal relations which people exploited. Like a typical Shakespearean hero, his admirable qualities were paradoxically his basic weaknesses. We shall return to this later. Gowon was soon to find out, I'll tell that again, Gowon was soon to find that the more he conciliated Ojukwu, the more fastidious the latter became. What do you see here is that everybody agreed, by the way, that Ojukwu stole the show. He was more serious, was better prepared. The others came to talk to their brother. Ojukwu came to do business. And I think for that, he has my respect. Anything apart from that is just a child throwing tantrums. So he was, on business. He said what he wanted. And like I said, that would make the head of state a dog that cannot bite. But he agreed. And he was doing all of these things to reconcile, to get Ojukwu to be on his side. I learned a lesson a long time ago. Never do that kind of thing. You say you're going to have a meeting, there will be no secretaries. Ojukwu is coming with 9. Saying you're not having any meeting again. See, our leaders actually caused this trouble that we're facing in Nigeria. out of, and let it not be like, no, let it be like that. You have to maintain standard. A person doesn't respect agreement, you drop it. And I think all this placating and pandering, which is, and I'm saying it because election is coming next year. We learned from last election, by the way, so hopefully we're not going to repeat that mistake. All this pandering and, let it not be like we hate them. You don't hate anybody. Do you hate people? If you don't hate people, just do what you have to do. Do the right thing. If they say you hate them, that's their business. They should not have had this meeting, by the way. Ojuku went with people that were not supposed to be there. Ojuku was asking for things. They were just giving him everything because they were trying to play him. Don't try that pandering nonsense. It doesn't really make... Let me tell you something. No matter how much you pander, the person you're pandering to will still not appreciate it. Question: did they appreciate what happened in Aburi today? No. This is the agreement. You don't agree, or you do something against what we've agreed on, it's over. We have another agreement, and if you make any mistake, we'll stop again. And by the way, you know what they said, General Ankara said from NU Akpan's book? That they took nothing, they gave all. That's not negotiation. That's not negotiation. Let's go on. So we're going to finish, then we'll go back to NU Akpan. As events were later to show, the Aburi resolutions were indicative of the military's ineptness in the politics of compromise and tolerance, which had been typical of Nigeria's political system. Not only did Aburi expose the military's inability to resolve knotty political problems, it showed the military as politically immature as it questioned its claim to statesmanship. In view of their new roles, later events justified the above evaluation of Aburi. The Aburi resolutions were interpreted in various forms. To Ojukwu, it meant extreme decentralization, which should give the Eastern region full control over its affairs, a quasi-sovereign state, sharing some essential services with other units of the Federation. Though Ojukwu thought he had outsmarted Gowon at Aburi, he was reportedly surprised when on his arrival at Enugu Airport, one of his advisors said, "But you have not brought us full independence or sovereignty." Centrifugal pulls in the eastern region increased, and Ojukwu was certainly under pressure from his advisors to pull out of the Federation. In no time, he accused the federal government of unwillingness to implement the Aburi resolutions. On the other hand, Gowon saw the Aburi resolutions differently. In his address to the diplomatic corps on 1st March 1967, he said, "We agreed to return to the constitutional position from January 17, 1966. Thus, any powers which were taken away from the regions after January 17 were restored to them." In this context, we agreed that the Supreme Military Council should be given powers to deal with all matters of national importance affecting the whole country. I emphasize that it was never the intention that any military governor should have the power to veto decisions taken by the Supreme Military Council. This, as a matter of fact, is one of the major points of disagreement, which has held up the draft decree on the Constitution. What is it saying here? So, we're going to be going back and forth, okay? Back and forth. So we read some things that will go to NU Akpan, but let me quickly explain what he said here. See, what Gowon is saying is that we're going to go back to what the government say. I'm not going to be the Supreme Commander. We are all going to decide together as military heads. So the head of state and the military governor. So you had, at the time, there were 4 military governors, right? There were 3, but there was 1 in Lagos, right? But there were 3. There were 4 actually, and then 1 in Lagos, making 5, and then the head of state. So you would have the 4 regional governors would be the one in the north, Asan Katsina, the west, the east, and then the midwest. So the idea basically was that whatever decision had to be made for the country would not just be somebody sitting down as Supreme Commander like Ironsi and declaring stuff. So what he thought, or what he interpreted the old conversation as, is the fact that we're going to go back to what we were before, but it's not like we're going to have one region deciding what they want to do and say they have autonomy, which makes military government and you have autonomy. Have you ever heard of it? Please. We read, but we have not read everything in this world. Please, if you know any example, please let me know. I would like to study that example where you have a military government, but the constituent units have autonomy and they can break out and do whatever they want to do at any point in time. Why is it military? Where's the hierarchy? Where is the chain of command coming from? If you have a high authority, why would everything begin and end in the region? So Ojukwu was telling everybody that he gotten out of it, but the elders is caucus in the east were like, but you not get us. Let me read what he said in this book. He said, but you have not brought us full independence or sovereignty. Now let's go back to Enyo Akpan's book, because that statement is also in Enyo Akpan's book, The Struggle for Secession. That is from the head of state, even though the governor of the East still said he would not recognize Colonel Gowon as such until he had been formally so appointed, and had undertaken to propose that at the next meeting of the Supreme Military Council in Nigeria. A carefully drafted communique had been issued in Ghana, and the governor expected to receive praise and commendations from his mentors at home. Unfortunately, these he was not to have, for on arrival at Enugu Airport, all he heard from his arch-advisor was, "Thank God you have come back alive. That is all that matters." I was close by and immediately asked if he had not heard all the governor had achieved at Aburi. A direct telephone or wireless link had been installed between Enugu and Ghana, and the governor had been informing them of what was happening at the conference. "But you have not brought us full independence or sovereignty," was the reply I received. In other words, even when they were going for Aburi in January 4 and 5, 1967, what Ojukwu's advisors wanted was a separate nation. That had nothing to do with restructuring Nigeria or the Aburi. That's not what they wanted. They wanted to break the nation apart even back then. The governor was surprised and peeved. He drove home to the State House accompanied by those who had come to receive him at the airport. There he briefed them fully on the decisions taken, after which he was probably advised to inform the public contrary to the understanding reached in Aburi, namely that the first statement on the outcome of Aburi should come from Lagos. Thus, soon after our arrival back home, the governor called a press conference because it has come, quote-unquote, to his notice, because it has come to my notice that the public is anxious to have more details of decisions taken. And his hurry to make the statement was caused by the misgivings, which I understand are prevalent in the region as a result. He went on, I recall that just before my departure, when the public did not even know that our meeting was so close, students and other groups of individuals issued resolutions advising me against attending any meetings with my counterparts. The governor then analyzed the implications of the Aburi decisions, stressing that the regions would henceforth pull further apart than before. The army had been regionalized and so on and so forth. This alerted and annoyed Lagos. Lagos was the capital at the time. This alerted and annoyed Lagos and all the other participants at the conference. They awoke to the fact that they might have been hoodwinked, and were annoyed that the understanding that the first statement should emanate from Lagos should have been disregarded by Colonel Ojukwu without even the courtesy of prior information to the rest. What are they saying here? Home, the person that will tell the world what they decided would be the head of state. Ojukwu went to talk his nonsense, and what he said was different from what they agreed. He said they'll be putting further apart. There was much wrangling between Colonel Gowon and Colonel Ojukwu over the phone on the matter. The harm had been done. The cat was out of the bag. The confidence engendered at Aburi was undermined and was being replaced by awakening suspicions. A group of top federal civil servants met to scrutinize the decisions and arrived at firm recommendations for their rejection. The storm began to gather, turbulent and fast. I'm back to Gowon's book now. Gowon accused the Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu of having interpreted his gesture of unity and good faith as meaning that all current senior appointments and posting be made by the Supreme Military Council. Such a decision, Gowon explained, could only lead to administrative chaos. He said that the thinking here was in respect to posts such as permanent secretaries and principal representatives abroad. Ojukwu denied having suggested cancelling the appointment of existing civil servants. The problems of interpretation notwithstanding, Gowon was bent on fulfilling the terms of the Aburi agreement with minor modifications. Ojukwu had made so much political capital out of the Aburi decisions that Gowon felt that he was honor-bound to implement them. Slogans of "On Aburi we stand" filled the air and pages of newspapers. In fact, Ojukwu even threatened in February 1967 that he would act unilaterally if the Aburi agreements were not implemented by March 31, 1967. Gramophone records of the proceedings of the Aburi meeting were pressed and sold freely. Similarly, the radio station in Enugu serialized tapes of such proceedings. Driven to the wall, Gowon ordered the publication of the proceedings in the national dailies. In other words, everything they discussed in that meeting, Ojukwu put it on radio and they were saying it's on cassettes or gramophone records. So Gowon had to eventually release it in the dailies. That's why when you hear people say things like nobody knows what Aburi Accord looked like, it's a lie. Everybody that lived around that time, they knew. And thankfully, they also wrote it in these books. So it gives us an idea how Ojukwu was moving after the return. He was shouting "On Aburi we stand," but he was doing things contrary to the spirit of Aburi. Then he said he had a different understanding of Aburi. Let's go back to Enyuakwan. Latent and anticipate. Let's go back to Enyuakwan. With his usual calculating and anticipatory mind, Colonel Ojukwu knew that once the true implications of the Aburi decisions were...
Joining us now with stories trending around the world is Oji Okpe. Oji?
Good morning, Dr. Abati. How are you this morning?
Today.
Yes.
Black and white.
You know,
today.
okay.
People want to start the colors.
Even
why,
the lipstick is red.
Yes, you know why it's red? Because February is the month of love.
Okay.
Did you forget? Can I wear red all month? You know I love love. Dr. Abati cannot forget.
Valentine's Day.
You know what we are doing in the month of love.
Other flowers now, because there is a big rush.
For who?
Well, let's wait for Rotus to do the
Valentine,
report.
it's a month of love.
Who?
For you now.
For me.
Yes.
For
Okay, you don't like love.
I buy
were appreciated in Lagos, his colleagues at the conference might consider themselves duped. And so either... Let's go back to Enyuakwan. With his usual calculating and anticipatory mind, Colonel Ojukwu knew that once the true implications of the Aburi decisions were appreciated in Lagos, his colleagues at the conference might consider themselves duped, and so either stall on implementing the proposals, as happened in the case of the decision made on August 9, 1966, about the posting of troops, or even repudiate the decisions, as indeed was virtually to happen in this case. Somebody wrote on TikTok, Ojukwu pirated Aburi Accord. God forgive you. Hey, yeah. Akadao said Jesus did not succumb or subscribe to pandering. John 2:24 and 25. Well done, Pastor. Ojukwu accordingly wanted to ensure that the others did not have time to have second thoughts for the decisions, and his strategy was to set deadlines for the implementation of those aspects of the agreements which meant most to him and his ultimate aims. Thus, he persuaded the meeting to agree that law office of the Federation should meet on January 14th. That was about a week after the elections returned to Nigeria, and list all the decrees and provisions of decrees which should be repealed to restogated not later than January 21st, 1967. Since he also needed money, he induced used the meeting to agree that finance permanent secretaries should meet within 2 weeks and submit recommendations for the allocation of funds. The decree was not promulgated by January 21st, 1967. In other words, they had a meeting January 4 and 5. They returned around 7 thereabouts. Ojukwu proposed to have a meeting on 14th, and he said he wanted a decree by 21st. In other words, everything must be done in 2 weeks, which was, wasn't realistic, essentially. But I think he did this in order to keep them on their toes, right? Before then, Colonel Ojukwu had been importuning the head of the military government to honor the deadline. But as we have seen, others were now having second thoughts. Why were they having second thoughts? Because as soon as they got back, Ojukwu did what they decided not to do before they left Aburi. In other words, the person that was supposed to read the agreement was actually go on. What are you writing in the comment section? It is well. All right. So you had essentially changed the agreement even before he got to Nigeria. He was doing what he wasn't supposed to do based on what they agreed to do. And so the people are wondering, like, okay, wait, though, why is it that he's why is it getting us to do this according to his own timetable? Why is it, pushing us to do it as soon as possible? I wasn't supposed to even think about this. And by the way, Aburi Accord is not a law. It's not a decree. It was not a decree, right? And from the Nigerian side, they were still going to talk about some things. But in actual fact, I don't even blame Ojukwu for what happened in Aburi, because he was prepared. They were doing brother. We are all family members. Ojukwu did not have time for that, which is how you should treat people. The funny thing is that when you now treat Easterners like that, they'll begin to cry and say that you hate them. But that's actually how to do business. You just go straight. No laughing, no, just like Ojukwu, no laughing, no embracing, no, just business. Nigerian guys were doing kajayo, good people, great nation. It makes no sense. Anyway, so before then, Ojukwu had been importuning the head of the military government to honor the deadline, but as we have seen, others were now having second thoughts. Later, a draft decree came from the federal government but was clearly out of tune with the Aburi recommendations. The East naturally could not accept it. Tension heightened. Arguments and even quarrels broke out and worsened when on January 15th, the federal government launched a vicious pamphlet in answer to several which had been published by the East. In other words, in 1 week, the Eastern region had published several pamphlets, released gramophone records of the conversation in Aburi. So after about a week, the federal government had to respond. There's a pattern you notice in Nigerian history, especially between Nigerian federal government and the East. The East always starts with this propaganda thing. Nigeria responds. For Aburi, it happened. During the war, it happened. Right now, it is happening. Where the East pushed the Christian genocide narrative in the US, Nigeria now wants to respond, and you have some people that call themselves lovers of Nigeria, who we call emergency lovers of Nigeria, saying that Nigeria doesn't have to really respond. Why should we respond? We're just wasting money. In other words, allow one narrative in order to prove that you are one nation. It makes no sense. Anyway, it says here, the federal government on January 15th launched a vicious pamphlet in answer to several which had been published by the East. The federal pamphlet was entitled Nigeria 66. Colonel Ojukwu claimed that in the true spirit of Aburi, Colonel Gowon had told him in advance about the publication, and he had persuaded Colonel Gowon to agree to suspend it. In other words, Ojukwu had released propaganda materials for a week. Gowon published stuff from the Nigerian perspective, and guess what Gowon did? He still informed Ojukwu before publishing it. Meanwhile, Ojukwu doing all this nonsense. He did not tell Gowon before he did anything. If you go back to the book that we read earlier, there's a statement that they made there, and I think it's important for all of us to hear it. Especially for those of us who are very, good people, great nation. Like we said about Gowon, it says, Gowon was straightforward and honest in his dealings. This was to be seen throughout his rule. It was a good quality in interpersonal relations, which people exploited. Like a typical Shakespearean hero, his admirable qualities were paradoxically his basic weaknesses. once, I mean, it's good to be, it's good to be kind, to be soft. But there's a difference between being soft and being weak. If you're soft to the wrong person, you will count it for weakness. It's a general rule of thumb. If you're soft with the wrong person, that person will count it like you are weak. That's why sometimes you are soft, sometimes you are tough, but you're consistent. But anytime anybody wants to take your softness for granted, you show them. And make sure Nigeria, we had to wait. Even when we were going to do something about him declaring Biafra, I would say, and Gowon was like, we're going to have a police action, just quickly, just we want in and out. We're going to be done with it. Until the war started. Imagine they had bundled Ojukwu house in 66. Forget Aburi. Imagine they had bundled him out around September. When he started bombing Lagos and bombing Ore, just take him out. Not kill. Bundle him out. Put him inside one prison. Did they not imprison Victor Banjo? Didn't he kill Victor Banjo? Ojukwu was very tough. He was not very wise, but was very tough. Not very wise. I'm not saying he wasn't wise at all, but you can make up whatever it is. So what you see essentially is that you are trying to say, oh, one Nigeria is where to speak for a while. After a while, you see me cool for them. It's not because I hate anybody. Just I don't take fool for granted. I don't take, what's the word now? I don't suffer fools gladly. And that's what Gowon should have done instead of being, Jelenke. I think people don't know the difference, to be honest. We don't know the difference between being soft and being weak, or being tough and being wicked. You can be soft and strong and tough without being wicked. You can be weak and wicked. You can be soft and not be wicked. Dollars, but they want to prove something, so they're always wicked. We know them. I won't give examples right now, but you get the point. If, and again, hindsight is 2020, so I'm not trying to, drag General Gowon or anything. But here's the truth, and you will agree with me, that if the person that Ojukwu was dealing with were to be Murtala Muhammad, there would not have been a war. And that's why I say people should be grateful for Gowon. Not because of the war, but because of the way he handled things before and after the war. There would be no Aburi Accord. There will be no Aburi. After he called for that ad hoc conference in August and September, and Ojukwu began to send people to blow up Ore Bridge and blow up Federal Palace Hotel, that month, September of 66, they would have taken Ojukwu out of Enugu, dumped him in one place, just to get him straight, if possible. Someone says that was why Kanu was doing the same, because no consequences for what Ojukwu did. Yeah, exactly now. Ojukwu returned to Nigeria with a hero's welcome. What did he suffer for what he did? Nothing. When you are tough, again, it's not from being wicked though. Being wicked is what Ojukwu did. Ojukwu was wicked. Remember when we read Nebogram Douglas's book last week? When he was telling him about how people were dying, he said he didn't even flinch. So I'm not saying be wicked, I'm saying be tough. Once you do that, you set the precedent. You are saying this is how we run things here. But once you start saying, hey, let's just be good people, okay, they just take it for granted. Some people require slaps, koboko, with the love of Christ. May God give us wisdom and understanding. It is well with us. Let's go back to the book now. So yes, Gowon was just allowing things to slide because of, let's just see how it goes. I mean, again, he was young. And yes, he was a Christian. And yes, he was genteel and gentle. He was a great man, right? But you see, one of the things about history is that we can also learn from the errors of our elders, not to discredit them, but to make sure we don't make the same mistakes they made. That way, we grow. Okay? So, in case you have an issue like, why are you talking about him? That was a very terrible way of handling the situation. September, in case it happens in any case, September 66, you get Ojukwu out of Enugu, take him to one place in Kirikiri, straight. There will be no war. You restructure Nigeria. We will not be here in 2026. But again, hindsight is 2020. We can say all that because now we're looking at what they've done, right? But essentially, let's learn rather than just judge. Go on. Let's go on. On February 17th to 18th, secretaries to the military government, accompanied by legal and financial advisors, met in Benin to advise on how the Aburi decisions should be implemented. There had up till now been pressures on the federal government by those who read the writing on the wall to do something about carrying out the Aburi decisions in order to keep the country together. At that meeting, I impressed upon my colleagues the need to implement the decisions in order to enhance the image and good name of the country. No matter what personal reservations one might have about the actual decisions, the fact remained that there were agreements freely entered into by those in whose hands lay the destiny of the country. I criticized my colleagues in the federal government for trying to change policy decisions duly taken by the highest authority in the land, the Supreme Military Council. As civil servants, our duty was to carry out the decisions of government, although we had also the right, indeed the duty, to analyze and spotlight the effects of such decisions. The outcome of that meeting was Decree number 8. Which, in my view, faithfully implemented the Aburi decisions. Who is speaking here? Someone speaking for Nigeria? No. This was NU Apan, the secretary to the Eastern Region government. On Wednesday, we're going to go deeper into Decree number 8. We'll try and open it up. Have them, so we're not looking for them, thank God. We're not going to read American cables about what Ojukwu did after Decree number 8 after the draft decree came out, and the kind of conversations they had with Ojukwu and what he said to them. Some people, God has to judge them, not just for their sins, but for keeping generations of people in the Southeast in perpetual darkness and victimhood. Ojukwu did not try. In fact, but it's not new, he's not the only one. Almost everybody from that place, leaders from that place are blessed. Where was I? Let's read this one and then we'll close. We'll continue from Decree number 8 on Wednesday, but let's finish something here. Gowon accused Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu of having interpreted his gesture of unity and good faith as meaning that all current senior appointments. Okay, we read that already. We read about the gramophone records that Ojukwu was waxing records of what's it called? Confidential meetings. Okay. When the draft of the decree, that's decree number 8 that NU Apan mentioned, when the draft of the decree implementing the Aburi decisions was ready for approval, all members of the Supreme Military Council were invited to Benin for a meeting on the 10th of March 1967. Ojukwu declined the invitation on the grounds that Benin was not safe enough for him because of the presence of northern troops in the western region. Benin was not even in the western region. In 67, it was in the Midwest. This has something to do with the way this guy was raised. Anyway, he said he wouldn't be able to go to Benin, and that was not because it was not safe for him due to the fact that the northern troops were present in western Nigeria. Yet, 2 days after the meeting, Ojukwu visited Benin to see Lieutenant Colonel Ejo on a quote-unquote friendly visit. It proved beyond doubt that Ojukwu was just playing for time to get himself and the Eastern region organized. Gowon definitely knew this, but had to keep his word of honor and compromise with the hope that the nation could be together again. He had never liked confederalism and certainly did not like the draft decree, which was to establish a de facto confederal government in Nigeria. He would have loved not to have been in a position to sign a document such as he was now to sign. In the name of compromise and Nigeria's image, he had to accommodate his colleague from the East. He thus retreated from his preference announced in his program of November 30, 1966. From federalism, Gowon now embraced confederalism in Nigeria's quest for a model of government. When the draft decree did not call it confederalism, while the draft decree did not call it confederalism, that was what it was. For Gowon, it was a moment of crisis. He was prepared to compromise everything but the experiment of Nigerians living apart and later on deciding whether it was possible to come back again, which was what Ojukwu was saying. They should be apart and then later they can decide to come back together. He was one who was in the government. It was difficult for him to make that decision. And it would be difficult for any sane person to do that, by the way, especially if you're a military governor or military head of the government. So it says here that Gowon did not like confederalism, right? But he had to succumb because he wanted to just get Nigeria back together again. And then he said, from federalism, Gowon now embraced confederalism in Nigeria's quest for a model of government. While the draft decree did not call it confederalism, that was what it was. For Gowon, it was a moment of crisis. He was prepared to compromise everything, but the experiment of Nigerians, quote unquote, living apart and later on deciding whether it was possible to come back again. It was in this moment of tough decision-making at Benin that one of the civil servants, the then Secretary of Western State Government, offered him advice Gowon would never forget. When rough, this is Gowon speaking now, when things were really rough, I remember him coming to say to me, sir, whatever it is, no matter how bad it may look, no matter how difficult the decision might be, if you have decided on that issue, approve it. Since you are sincere and the other side is not, they might do something which will then allow you to take which will then allow you to take further action. But no one would accuse you of going back on your words. I remember that very distinctly. It was Peter Odumosu. So Gowon and his colleagues, excluding Ojukwu, approved the draft decree implementing Aburi. On 17th March 1967, it came into effect as Decree Number 8, 1967. According to this decree, Nigeria became more confederal than it had ever been. By its terms, a decree which was the sole prerogative of the federal military government could only come into effect with the consensus of all the military governors. Both legislative and executive powers of the government of the Federation were vested in Supreme Military Council. The Federal Executive Council was to discharge only those functions which were specially delegated to it by the Supreme Military Council. What's it saying here? We're going to continue from here next time, but what's it saying here? It's saying that just like you have the Parliament today, we have the National Assembly, right? And then we had the Supreme Military Council made up of the head of state and the military governors from that Parliament. They also give the executive direction of the government, right? So essentially what you're saying is that this is not a military dictatorship. Although it's a military government, but the head of state has to confer with the leaders or the governors of the regions on how to decide. And whatever they decide is what the entire government then follows. That's what Gowon agreed to, and that's what Ojukwu rejected. It was the draft decree was promulgated on March 17, 1967. It's called Decree Number 8. Someone says, is it possible to treat both Decree 8 and 34? No. We have to do it one by one. If we just be doing like this, we will not understand it very well. So another day, we'll do that one. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what Decree Number 8 was about, what the Eastern Region government or staff, what they said about it, what Ojukwu said about it, what American government said about it, what Ojukwu told the American government, and why Gowon had to call his bluff. We'll do all of that on Wednesday. what have we learned so far is that number one, you can't personally, I don't like discussing issues in isolation because it paints like half of the picture, right? And those who do that are those who usually want to appear to be the victim of the narrative. So whatever they did that caused that wala unfair, they just go straight to the part where I'm the victim. There's nothing wrong with you talking about yourself being a victim if you are a victim, but it's also important to understand what happened before you became a victim. So that way we'll know what your role was in the events that followed. Okay? That was one. And in order to talk about Aburi, you have to go back to at least the coup that happened in 66, the counter coup in 66, the events, the killings, in the north, in the east, terrible events, and then the ad hoc conference that was put together by Gowon, Ojukwu's reactions to it in September of 66, as I was bombing places in Western region. It was on a bombing spree. I was also attempting to do the same thing in the north, in the waterworks, in the power stations, in the stadium. It was trying to just destroy everywhere because, he was trying to get his own nation. By the way, Ojukwu talked about having his own nation as far back as June 7, 1966. Anyway, we went from there to talking about the fact that Gowon tried several times to have meetings with the military governors. Ojukwu never attended. With the thought leaders across the regions, he made sure Eastern representatives did not go. We talked about how back in 66, traditional rulers from Yoruba land, Oba, our kings, went to Enugu to talk to Ojukwu, a 30-something-year-old boy, to tell him how, best to resolve the issue. He did not listen. We talked about how the British High Commissioner, the American ambassador, went to talk to him. Eventually, one of the diplomats from the UK and General Ankara in Ghana were able to convince him to have a meeting in Aburi. And so on January 4 and 5, himself and the Nigerian government on one hand, and Ojukwu, there was no Biafra at the time, the Eastern region, were in Aburi. And contrary to the agreement, Ojukwu went with advisors, even though they were not supposed to go. Was it good or bad? It was bad because it was against the agreement. But it made sense because he was going for business. It was going for business. It was Nigerian guys just going there to go and be kajo. So all of that, eventually, they had the meeting regardless. Like I said earlier, Gowon should never have had that meeting with him because he wasn't supposed to go with folks. But he went with about 9 advisors. And we found that in the book by J. Sawelaigo. And the truth of the matter is this. I like what Gowon did, that regardless of the fact that this guy has broken the deal or broken the agreement, we're still going to have the meeting because we don't want to make it look as if we're, changing, whatever. But I think that Gowon could have done better. It's a lesson for all of us. This is not to blame Gowon so much, but to learn from it. If you're having business meeting, it's a business meeting. All this we are doing panji. Maybe they'll make us believe that we are all one Nigeria is nonsense. They don't believe it. They don't care. What they want to do is what they want to do. Just stay on topic, be fair, be kind, but don't be weak. We also learned that after that meeting, they go back to Nigeria, and rather than go on, by the way, we got this information from both books. If you notice, we're combining both books. We're reading north, east, north and east. And there's a reason I didn't read any Yoruba until, if it's too late. I don't think I want to read any Yoruba book, but let's just continue. If I have to, I will. According to the report, it was actually Gowon who was supposed to announce to the world what they discussed. But Ojukwu, trying to please his weak clique, announced and just, said whatever he wanted to say based on his own understanding of what the agreement was. And then he went on for about a week, releasing records, gramophone records, and publishing stuff in the newspapers about Aburi Accord. And after about a week, the federal government had to answer, and they published their own, although Ojukwu still Gowon still went ahead to confer with him, which he shouldn't have done. But anyway, eventually they had a meeting. Again, January 4-5 was the meeting in Aburi, right? Ojukwu proposed to have another meeting on January 14th, and they went to have the decree on January 21st, which was unrealistic. But anyway, they had a meeting in February. All the secretaries of the government of all the regions, they had a meeting in Benin. and he talked about, that was in February, and he talked about the draft decree. And by March 17, a draft decree was put out there. Everybody agreed to it except Ojukwu. And what's in that decree? Why were they saying that the decree was, carried in the spirit of Aburi? Why did the secretary to Ojukwu say that? What percentage, and I'll talk about the percentage of Aburi that is inside that decree. What is the percentage that was not inside that decree? Why didn't they give him 100% of what he wanted? All of that we'll discuss on Wednesday.
All right, thank you very much for listening to that.
Thank you for listening to that. That was the road to Aburi and the stories we were never told. This is the first part of the series. The second part will be up on our YouTube channel later today or by tomorrow morning. And we will have a conversation around that perhaps on Thursday, right? So that we can finish the series itself. But I hope this helps us understand a bit more, and also provides context, right? Rather than just running along with slogans, we actually know exactly what happened. So you have people say things like, "Well, where we stand. What does it mean?" And I hope that with what we just listened to, you actually have at least an idea of the circumstances surrounding the events and what Nigeria did for the Southeast. Let me also say that one of the things I try to put out there is I want us to have information that helps us appreciate Nigerian leaders. And the reason I'm saying that is because for the most part, and you see with the older people, and I'm beginning to see it with our generation as well, and I don't think it should go on to our younger ones or our kids, where you are apologizing for things. And the reason you're apologizing is because you are ignorant, you don't know what was done. You are only apologizing because you are empathetic. And empathy without knowledge makes you susceptible to being blackmailed. Okay? Because now you're empathetic. The person just simply weaponizes empathy. And then you find yourself saying sorry. Meanwhile, you should be the one actually demanding apology from the person who is gaslighting or blackmailing you. So all of that to say that the Aburi Accord is not just a slogan. It means a lot. And some things happened before, they had to go to Aburi in Ghana. And also the things Ojukwu was requesting, some of those things were, of course, ridiculous. But I understand why he would do that, because he also wanted to keep them on their toes. And I actually like the way he handled them, to be honest. I like the way Ojukwu handled Nigerians in Aburi and after Aburi, at least up until February. The reason I say that is because he knew what he wanted, and the mistake Nigerian leaders made at the time was they did not deal with him based on who he was. So it's one thing for you to be gentle, it's another thing for you to understand your opponent and to treat that person based on their personality, not based on what you think they should be. Ojukwu was a serious-minded person. He was not a very conciliatory person. He wasn't even, if you ask me, he lacked good manners, right? He had no respect for anything. But at least he knew what he wanted, and he went for it. Unlike the Nigerian side that was trying to placate him and everybody just be happy and things like that. I think that if you look at our history, the best way to actually deal with certain people is that way. Like, just they present themselves and then you act based on that, right? And so imagine if Nigeria's leaders had, been as serious and on business as Ojukwu. I think we would probably have made serious progress. There would be no war. And I say that not to condemn our leaders. I mean, like I always say, they did their best. Okay, and also we have to appreciate that some of us speaking about twice the age of some of these leaders. Some of you in the audience right now, you're like twice or thrice. I know people here who are over 70. these people we're talking about were in their late 20s, early 30s. So they were very young. So you can appreciate the naivety or whatever mistakes they made. And by the way, hindsight is 2020. We can all speak like this because, you know, we have seen their mistakes. So I'm not trying to downplay what they did. I'm just saying that we can learn from their mistakes. So we don't repeat that kind of thing where you're always pandering. Here's the crazy part. The one who pandered, and he didn't do it because he was a bad man, by the way. General Gowon is a very good person from everything I've studied about him. Okay? Now, he who was trying to be gentle with everybody, neither Nigeria nor the Igbos recognized the things he did. And that for me is the sad part. Nigerians don't even appreciate what he did, because most of us, we don't even know what he did. So there's nothing to appreciate because we don't know. The Igbos that know, they twisted everything and made him look like a demon, so that even today they still hate him. So the question is, to what end? Okay, maybe God, at least God will know that you're a good man. But the point is, if you're going to do something, at least let your people know what you're doing. And I think these sessions will help us appreciate him more, and also to learn from his errors. Be good to everybody, be kind to everybody, but pander to no one. And if anybody, you know, moves mad, you deal with them. But I want to tell you, maybe I'm going to tell you, there's a story I'll tell you guys one of these days, how I learned not to pander, and I was 13. And I think it probably shapes the way I speak. It's not that one hates anybody. It's just that if people notice that you're a very kind person, which I think I am, they think it means that you are weak. And they can capitalize on that to push their agenda. So for me, be kind, right? But when a person shaking it, you remember Thai currency. Everybody who knows what Thai currency said, you can write in the comment section. Just remember Thai currency's famous quotes. Were laughing or were. Sometimes I think it works in certain circumstances. All right. Thank you very much for listening. I don't know if anyone wants to share their thoughts. So if you want to speak, please send your request. Just send to maybe a couple of people before we call it today. Tomorrow, we're going to begin the journey. It's going to be interesting. We're going to start talking about the treasonable felony charge and how Papa was incarcerated. Okay, that will be tomorrow, Wednesday, at 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. Please, let's come early. Make sure the news doesn't take too long so that we can get into the topic and finish early as well. So please join us 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. We're going to start talking about that. Someone asked the question last week, and I said we're going to have a series on it. But on Thursday, we're going to finish with the Aburi stuff we just started listening to. Okay. So thank you very much for being part of today's session. I don't know. I can't see anybody raising their hand, so I'll just read some comments and then we'll call it today. If you'd like to support what we're doing, please reach out. Or, by the way, before we go, I'm just going to put up the account details. We do this from time to time. So if you want to support what we're doing, kindly use the details. I'll put it up very soon. Okay, let's do YouTube. Mumbo. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Drag Bemi Olayemi. Thank you very much. Good evening all. And thank you very much. And please like and share the light. Well, thank you very much for writing that and subscribe. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I think we've had a good run for today. So yeah, tomorrow we'll get into our Lord's journey. Let me even say this so that maybe it will also help us prepare for tomorrow. It might interest you that the old treasonable felony thing that the gentleman was asking about last week, the idea of it did not even begin. Let me put it this way. It wasn't that Awo needed to do it for him to be incarcerated for it. They already started spreading the idea that he was doing it even when he did not even know what they were talking about, years before the trial began. And it's also amazing that some of the people that pushed that narrative were Yoruba people. And when they were called to explain where they got that information, they mentioned certain people. When they called those people in, they said they didn't say it. And maybe this is one of the reasons certain people in Yoruba land are not considered, they are considered persona non grata. Right? Who are those people? Who said what? We'll talk about all of that tomorrow. And then, we'll go all the way to Aolo being in prison and the overtures made to him by the federal government of Nigeria while he was in prison, what he was asked to do, what he was told to essentially forego, and how he would get pardon from the government. This was before Tafawa Balewa died. And then what did he say to Iransi? What did Papa say to Iransi? Did Iransi respond? And then eventually, we're going to end with how he was released on August 2nd, 1967. So it might take us 2, 3, 4 sessions, but we're going to have a great time. And I'm sure some of you know the things we want to discuss. So if you do, when the time comes for people to come up, I will expect that you come and share your thoughts with us. If you don't, we'll all get to learn together. There are many books we're going to be reading, because we want to make sure that we have full knowledge of the events. Okay, so we'll be reading books by Papa, books by other writers, right, that will actually illuminate that particular event. Right now, I'm thinking about the number of them. Like, it would be nice. Right? So join us tomorrow, 4 p.m. If your time was African time. We'll understand. I mean, I think it was probably the most harrowing period of our life. All of that time when they were having the trial, that was around the time when it was, it was in prison, it was in Ibadan, then house arrest in Ibadan, then house arrest in Ikene, then it was taken to Lekki, then Ikoyi, just very funny. Then it was in prison, they were having the case, the trial, and then his son was trying to travel from Ibadan to Lagos, died. Crazy times, but he came out stronger eventually. We're going to learn a lot from that period of his life and how that intertwines with Nigerian political history. Okay, so please join us 4 p.m. If your time West African time. We'll have a great time together. Thank you very much. If you'd like to support us, please use the bank details on the screen. If you'd like to reach out to me, please you can reach me on Telegram at Busui Oris, or on TikTok, Facebook, wherever you are. Just look for Busui Oris. You can, I think I'm an X as well. You can just say hello and we'll get talking. Thank you very much for being part of today's session. We're going to have the anthems now, and then we'll call it a day. So we have the Nigerian national anthem and the Yoruba anthem. Thank you very much.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians all are proud to serve our sovereign motherland. Our flag shall be a symbol that truth and justice reign. In peace all battle honored, and this we count as gain. To hand unto our children a banner without iṣẹ́ wa fún ẹwà fún orílẹ̀-èdè wa. Kàgbéga, kàgbéga, kàgbéga fáyé rí. Ìgbàgbọ́ wa ni pé láti bẹ̀rù làbọ̀ mọ́. Ká ṣiṣẹ́, ká ṣiṣẹ́, ká ṣiṣẹ́ ká jọlá. Ìṣọ̀kan àtòmìnira ni ẹ jẹ́ ká máa lépa. Tẹ̀síwájú fọ̀pọ̀ ire àtòhun tó dára. Ọmọ òkàlìdé bọ́ sípò ẹ̀tọ́ rẹ̀. Ìwọ ni ìmọ́lẹ̀ ògo adúláwọ̀.
lẹ́wọ̀ ìmọ̀lẹ́ ẹ̀wọ̀ ni wọ́kùn lágbára ọlọ́run ilẹ̀ yorùbá ò ní bàjẹ́ nàìjíríà náà ò ní bàjẹ́ nǹkan tó bá dáwọ́ lé mo máa yọrí sí rere ní lágbára ọlọ́run. May God bless you, may God bless this nation Yoruba, and may God bless the country Nigeria. May we keep making progress in all things. Thank you very much for being part of today's session. Again, please join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Ife time, West African time. Looking forward to seeing you then. All right. Have a lovely, lovely evening. Goodbye. Odaro. Esheo. Yes, Lagos. Thank you. Thank you. All right, then. See you guys tomorrow. Odaro.